Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket Politics with Phil and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's going to matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cameron, how was your week?
It was good. How about yours?
Pretty good. So, real quick for our listeners, if you didn't see it on our Facebook page, which we know you visit regularly for updated alerts on what's going on in politics, we are switching our weekly drop of this podcast to Tuesdays. That gives Cameron and I a little bit more flexibility in the future going forward. But with that being said, today we are going to talk about the biggest news story of the week, the Chinese spy balloon or meteorological research balloon, depending on who you talk to. We are also going to talk Ilhan Omar. We've got more news about the lying liar in Congress, George Santos. Is he becoming our favorite, Cam? I think so. And we will talk.
News.
Absolutely. We will talk about Mitch McConnell and some crazy stuff in the Senate now that they have fully returned to work, as well as the McCarthy and Joe Biden meeting on the debt ceiling. Then we'll move a little bit more into the economy with the latest jobs numbers release. We'll preview the State of the Union that is coming up on Tuesday. And we've got some more presidential candidates in the race. Cam, why don't you get us started?
Okay, so you mentioned the balloon. That's definitely been dominating the news for the last few days here. Speaking of that Chinese balloon, you said it, whether you call it the spy balloon, the weather balloon, whatever in the world it's called, it was lingering around the United States for a few days last week. In particular, it was out there hovering around the Air Force bases in Montana and some other Western Air Force bases, some of them where we've got nuclear missiles kept, a lot of different sites they seem to be targeting. I say sites, bases, etc. And with all that being said, speaking of Montana, right, this thing had certainly political fallout from different people on each sides of the aisle. But like I said, mentioning Montana, we actually heard Senator Jon Tester. He had some comments this past weekend on a local station there in Montana. Why don't we play that clip here quick for our listeners?
This is not surprising. They're doing stuff all the time. Most of it is up in space, but this time it happens to be a balloon. Very disturbing, and we need to treat it very, very seriously. I will tell you, our military leaders looked at this, looked at the options, looked at the threat, and made a decision. I will get briefed on this because I happen to be chairman of the Defense Subcommittee that funds the military. I will get briefed on this early next week on exactly why they did what they did. But in the end, it is very disturbing. And it's one of the reasons I am carrying a bill with rounds on not allowing China to buy farmland in the United States and other countries. And it's why we need to continue to make sure that we're prepared, both militarily, on the ground, on the sea, in the air, and in space, to deal with the threat that China is, because China is our most significant threat in this world right now. And that balloon yesterday is just a sign that we need to really handle these. And we have been, by the way, for many decades, handle them like they're the threat that they are.
Cam, first things first, what's your kind of reaction to what Jon Tester had to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can tell he's got concern there. I mean, I think most Americans feel what Senator Tester does and that he's got concern. I mean, I think we all do to an extent. And again, he's got some skin in this game because it did spend some time over his home state. He talks about this week, they hope to be digging into this thing in the Senate. to kind of find out what it was all about, get the classified briefings, etc. So, I mean, again, Phil, I think a lot of the country feels kind of similar sentiment to what Senator Tester does. Would you agree with that?
I would. The other thing too that's a sentiment that I've heard from several other people is why can't we just leave each other alone? Now, certainly it's not as easy as that because China's spying attempts is kind of predicated on us doing the exact same thing, as well as multiple kind of countries around the world. But it does bring up a point. Like, why can't we just stay in our own backyard, and stop sending our footballs into the neighbors and having to go retrieve them? You know what I mean?
Well, I guess my other thing with this balloon too. I mean, just talking about the balloon itself, I just will admit I've kind of been sitting there wondering why a balloon. I mean, got satellites out there and drones and all this other stuff. Why a balloon? Now, I know some people are saying this was more like a drone than a balloon, but still, don't you find it a little odd that here in 2023 they're just hovering giant balloons over our country? I mean, don't you think buying has advanced a bit more than that? Now, again, I'm sure there's more to this thing, but that's just something I found kind of weird.
Based on your and I's experience, it would be absurd for us to assume that we know the capabilities out there of our government, let alone a foreign government. But I did hear some reporting on NPR where they had, an expert in kind of that field saying, this balloon doesn't really look like it's going to learn that much. He said, yeah, at the end of the day, we don't know what all capabilities the balloon has, but you can look up any of these bases where they store nuclear weapons and various other stuff on Google Maps and get pretty high resolution photos of them.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot there. And I think he's right to an extent. Now, again, with the caveat, we don't know all the capabilities. But, the Republicans certainly took the chance to use this as a giant attack on our president.
Well, I mean, again, everything that pretty much makes the news nowadays is going to be politicized. So from one side or the other. And this comes out, I mean, you mentioned different Republicans. I heard a gamut of them on the Sunday talk shows yesterday. One in particular was Senator Marco Rubio, but some others. I've heard people questioning how long this thing was in our airspace, why it didn't get shot down sooner. What I have heard, the president has said, and it's come out of the White House, is that he took the recommendation from the Secretary of Defense to let this get out over the water before it was shot down. To try and minimize damages or to try and prevent damage / anyone getting hurt or possibly killed, because this thing was the size of, or apparently the payload was somewhere between 2 and 3 buses. So, I mean, if you can imagine, buses like that towering down out of the sky or something that size, it could have done some real damage. And so, that is obviously the conclusion of this thing is here on Saturday. It was actually shot down. Whatever move you make, you're going to get harassed by the other side. We've also learned this week that apparently this is not the only balloon that's been up in our airspace. Apparently during the Trump administration, there was, I believe, at least 3 of them that crossed U.S. airspace. So I think the greater question on people's minds is what in the world was this thing? Why was it here? And are we going to see it again? But
And in fact, we are, because it turns out that there's one over Latin America as we speak.
I heard that as well. And now whether that comes up into United States airspace or not, I don't know. But I think something else I was going to mention on this too was the fallout that happened, right? I mean, we had the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was going to go take a trip to China. He was going to, go to a conference in Beijing, and that got canceled because of what was going on. And I guess he said, now is not the time for me to go to Beijing. I did hear, Phil, that they're trying to get this trip rescheduled. What kind of political fallout do you think this has between us and China? And does it have anything maybe going or affecting us long term? I say affecting us, our relations with China. Do you see much fallout here?
We had early last week, there was that Air Force general who got caught on on tape basically saying we're going to be at war with China by 2025. So there is certainly something imminent regardless of this balloon or not. I think the biggest thing to look forward to is this is a huge diplomatic blunder. And you talked about Antony Blinken not going on his regularly scheduled trip. But again, honestly, I would have to say in this case, this is a really bad move and poor form on the Chinese. It's, you mentioned satellites earlier. It's one thing to kind of have that stuff that we all know exists. Whether it's satellites or clandestine kind of things that we hear about all the time. But this balloon, because it was like basically in public view and able to be spotted, definitely carries some weight. And I think that this actually hurts China in their diplomatic position more than it hurts the U.S. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think those are all fair comments you make. And again, I think, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think many people are just kind of scratching their heads over what's going on and why the balloon. And I do think these are all kind of a little bit bizarre, Phil. So I agree with you on that. Again, it made a lot of news last week. Are we going to still be talking about this thing 3 or 4 weeks from now? Probably not. I hate to say a flash in the pan, but you know how the country is, right? We suffer from shiny object syndrome, and there will be much more probably that will divert our attention here in the coming weeks. So I think you'd probably agree with me on that.
I will. Just a couple things before we leave the terror balloon or whatever we want to nickname it. It should be mentioned that this thing kind of happened late in the week last week, and it took Saturday Night Live almost no time to make this their cold opening sketch, so that was pretty entertaining. And the history of balloons flying over our country goes all the way back to World War II. Cam, did you know about the Japanese balloon attacks in World War II?
Yes, I've heard of them. It's not new, I guess, in the sense of, balloons being around and being used for warfare.
In World War II, Japan used the strategy of ballooning explosives or incendiary devices over to the U.S., courtesy of the jet stream. And it was pretty much a failed project, but I will say, in doing just a little bit of research, I found a case where I think it was 7 people actually died in one of the few balloons that fell to the ground in the state of Oregon and actually killed a couple people. So kind of some crazy news when you Google war balloons and things like that. You find out stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of crazy news, though, we've got more of it, and why don't we move here to the House? Last week we previewed this vote that was upcoming, at least upcoming during our last episode, on Ilhan Omar and the push to get her removed from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Well, the vote happened. It happened this past week, and so Ilhan Omar she was voted to be removed from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The vote was right down party lines, 218 Republicans to 218 for it, all Republicans, 211 against it, all Democrats, with one member voting present. That member was a Republican who happens to be on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and felt it best that he not vote. So with that being said, the vote is over. She's been pulled off. She's not off all committees, but she has been pulled off this one. You and I have kind of debated the whole committee thing. Again, I don't want to pick that scab necessarily open on this one, but to simply say this has had a lot of, certainly made a lot of news in and of itself. There's a lot of strong feelings on this on both sides. Phil, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's a little bit, it's disappointing that they're taking this route, right? So we're a month into the new house, and we really have nothing productive happening, right? There's some ceremonial votes. There's some things kicking people off of committees, whether it's out of spite or revenge. I get it. People don't like some of the things that Ilhan Omar spreads or has said in the past. But the reality of this is that the Democrats, when they owned the House, kicked it was Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar off of 2 committees, and what may have not been the greatest call on their behalf, but for certain reasons, because they were saying stuff, right? And both of those have been to white supremacist rallies. spoke out, made several anti-Semitic comments. I just don't. You had mentioned this to me as well, so I'm not trying to steal your thunder, but I don't think this is a good move, because this just looks like it's going to turn into a tit for tat, back and forth kind of thing. The Democrats, when they owned the House, removed 2 people from their committees, and now the Republicans have gotten 3. Does this continue on? Do you think this is just the beginning of this, or is it going to be let go after this?
Well, I'd like to say it'd be let go after this, but I don't know that I can say that. I mean, that's my fear here. Look, I'm not a fan of many of the things that Congresswoman Omar has said. Okay, now, when I say said, the comment she's made, on there's the 9/11 comment from a few years ago and some other things, right? I'm not a fan of those. At the same time, though, I'm also not a fan of people in the House just sitting here playing these games. You just said the tit for tat thing, like, well, you did it, now we're going to do it, and we're going to seek revenge. And I want to say this is the end of that, but I don't know that I can. Now, I did hear, and I don't have all the details on it, I've just heard whisperings, but supposedly Speaker McCarthy has talked to Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and said he wants Jeffries to put up some Democrats, and McCarthy will put some Republicans, and his goal is to make a bipartisan committee on House behavior, if you will. And I don't even know what it's called, so I'm not trying to call it the behavior committee, but part of me is hoping that if these 2 leaders are going to agree to do to this, maybe, I'm not saying this is true, but just in my heart, I'm kind of hoping maybe the 2 sides have said, all right, you had yours, we just had ours, but we try and fix this in the future and move on with life. Again, I'm not saying that's what's happening, but maybe we're going to get that out of this.
I get it. I just think the optics of what McCarthy's doing does not look particularly well when he's saying, you've made some poor comments about 9/11, and you've made some anti-Semitic comments, so we're taking you off of the Foreign Affairs Committee, yet he's allowing Marjorie Taylor Greene to remain on a Homeland Security Committee, when she's largely denied the 2 biggest things affecting Homeland Security from the past 25 years. That being 9/11, she said was a hoax, and COVID, right? Yeah. So I just don't think he's standing on the right ground, right? He's standing on, very, very loose principle here.
Well, now I will say this, as far as this vote that was made, I want to say this about Ilhan Omar. She does not have all the Democrats on her side either. They may have voted for her because they solidified, I guess, as a party and voted for her. But there are a number of Democrats that have said they're not in support of some of her behavior in the past. And I want to read something really quick from the freshman congressman out of Florida, rather, named Jared Moskowitz. And he's a Democrat. He also happens to be a Jewish man. And he said this, and I quote, "Make no mistake about it, my vote was not in support of Congresswoman Omar. Someone with her record of hateful comments does not belong in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. My vote was a vote to protect the institution for democracy and for preventing the weaponization of committee selection. When anti-Semitism arises in the halls of Congress, you will find me on the House floor calling out any member who displays rabid anti-Semitism," end quote. So, and I've heard some whisperings from some other Democrats that again, they may not be a fan. They weren't necessarily voting this way to support Omar per se. They were doing it in their mind, to protect the institution of the House. So I'll just say this about Ilhan Omar. She definitely has strong feelings, and it's not just down party lines, as I mentioned. So, yeah, I mean, I think
at least the Democrats are voicing an opinion that stands up for what is right in America, whereas the Republicans have said nothing about Paul Gosar, George Santos, or very little about George Santos, but seem to be totally silent on Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Jewish space lasers and
actually, not true. Last year,
attending white nationalist rallies that are put on by Nick Fuentes.
Actually, again, not true, because when it came time to vote her off committee and vote Gosar off, Republicans voted to take him off. Not all by any means, but they had some Republican votes, and they've said stuff
but
again.
Now they've switched though, Cam.
They haven't brought a vote up. I mean, they haven't brought a vote up. So I'm pretty sure that if again you peel the onion skin back on a number of moderate Republicans in the House, they're not in favor of the loud from either side. And so I will applaud Moskowitz, Congressman Moskowitz, for his comments, because you just said it. He's calling out what he feels is wrong, and I'll call out anybody, or I'll give a shout out to anybody who I think is calling out someone who's done the wrong. And when Green and Gosar were making their comments a couple of years ago and it came to vote, there was Republican support to remove them. Again, it wasn't widespread, but it was there.
All right, I'll just close that with this. If you can't see it from the examples I just gave you, who is the front runner for the Republicans' presidential nominee in 2024?
Yeah, I got it. It's Donald Trump. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the House, and it's not fair. It really isn't to sit and label every single Republican as a fan of Jewish, anti-Semites, or calling them anti-Semites and things like that. I really don't think that's fair.
I didn't label every single Republican. I just said they're complicit with it because they're not standing up for what's right.
And as far as Santos goes, there's a number of Republicans that have stood up to him. Now, we're going to get to him in a little bit, but there's a number of Republicans that have stood up to him also. It's just not, as you mentioned.
We're getting to him. We're getting to him now, right?
Yeah, but hang on. I just wanted one more thing.
We're getting to him now, right?
One more thing though on Omar to close that one up a little bit. I did want to say this though. We talked last week about a number of Republicans that had voted or were going to vote no on her. The House Majority Whip, Tom Emmer, he definitely did his job, I guess, because he brought around some of these reluctant Republicans to vote, because what we reported on last week, these 3 or 4 holdout Republicans, they came back to roost and voted to remove Omar. So there's that, right? So it turned out to be a lot about nothing, what we reported on last week from that side. I had one last question for you, though, on this. Does this boost Ilhan Omar's popularity, Phil, going forward?
Man, that's a tough one. I think you caught me off guard with this one. I wasn't ready for that. So if I dig down and do my best political analysis, I think there's 2 takes on this. I think this boosts her from her supporters and Democrats or Democrat leading people that don't necessarily support her. It helps her with those crowds. Independents, Republicans, I think it hurts her. So I think it's this is going to be conflicting forces each direction, right? So I think to the people who don't hate her, they're gonna see a boost, and for the people that do hate her, they're going to see a boost in hating her.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say that I think there is some danger here that the Republicans may have weaponized her. In other words, her popularity may boost up a little bit. So kind of an interesting take. That's not even my own take. I heard it from some pundit last week, but the mention of the possible danger here of making her some kind of a hero does exist with this vote. But nevertheless, regardless of how we feel or anyone in the House feels, they have voted her off. She is no longer on the Foreign Affairs Committee. She is still on some other committees, though, as we mentioned. But speaking of committees and in the House, why don't we transition to George Santos? He apparently has now stepped down from his committees, Phil. I guess he says he's waiting on some ethics investigations.
Yeah, so George Santos, again, I called him at the beginning of the show the lying liar in Congress. Now it looks like he's, lied about I don't know. It just gets more and more ridiculous, like this Spider-Man producer thing. So he has stepped down from his committees. Again, was this pressure from his cohorts in the House, or was this him doing it? What's going on here?
I want to believe that he just woke up and realized that he'd come and do the right thing, but I don't know that is a pattern of behavior that Mr. Santos displays. So I think there is pressure on the man. I mean, I saw a poll this weekend that in his home district there in New York on Long Island, an overwhelming majority of Democrats and Republicans want the man to step down. In fact, I saw a poll that said 72% of independents in his district and 71% of Republicans in his district are telling him not to just get off committees. They're telling him to step down. So I'll be honest with you. I don't even know what to believe about this guy anymore. Well, apparently not much, because he's fabricated an awful lot. But the other thing is, like, he's just become so outlandish, or the stories about him have become so outlandish that I've kind of quit paying attention to most of them. Where this ethics investigation goes or how long it takes, I don't know, because I really don't know how quickly the House, they move on these kind of things. But the one thing that did come out this past weekend that I do think has real potential for him to get in some trouble over is this, I guess, this sexual harassment allegation by a former volunteer. Phil, did you hear about that one?
Yeah. So a former staffer came out. There's several different things about this too, right? Here's the thing. I think all allegations have to be taken seriously, especially these types of allegations. But we've gone so hard in one direction anytime an accusation like this comes up that there's almost, it creates a little bit of room. And I don't want to dig myself in a hole where I'm going to say something that pisses all, 8 of our listeners off completely. But what I do want to say is that prior to this, there's definitely a reason why that staffer would be disgruntled, right? There was some controversy over getting compensated for the work they were doing. There's some other stuff surrounding this. So yes, it needs to be looked into. I just want to say that prior to the allegations coming out, there was already issues with why this person would have a bone to pick. Now, it all may be credible, but obviously they need to have a thorough investigation of this. And in all fairness, I will say that George Santos certainly looks like he would be the guilty party in this case, just based on his past behavior. But at the end of the day, Cam, we've been talking about this for this is the 4th episode where we've talked about this guy at least. And there still has yet to be any real accountability.
Well, he is under investigation now, and like I said, I think going forward, the sexual harassment will definitely get looked at. All of this being set aside, because we've talked about the accountability piece, now he's stepped off committees, etc. Do you think, Phil, that this sexual harassment thing could be the thing that brings him down?
I mean, it could be the thing that gets him out of the House the quickest, but I think campaign finance and the money stuff is going to be the one that gets him hemmed up. I think that's really where he's going to get screwed over and probably find himself in a white collar prison in the long run.
And that investigation is still ongoing. They're still looking at all these things. So again, the craziness just keeps going on. And I think it's pretty safe to say that we will hear more about Mr. Santos in the coming weeks. And I can only imagine what we'll be reporting on next week with this guy. But
absolutely,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you want to move over to the Senate?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that. Why don't we do that, Phil? What do you got from the Senate?
Well, so certainly some exciting news. I just love it, right? You know me, I love Republicans hating on Republicans. And that appears to be the case this week. Senator Mitch McConnell removed Senator Rick Scott and Senator Mike Lee from some positions, and apparently they didn't get the memo in the nicest possible way. You wanna take it from there?
Yeah, so it looks like the old crow himself, Mitch McConnell, and when I say old crow, that's Donald Trump's nickname for him. It looks like the old crow still got a little bite behind him because yeah, exactly. He pulled off Rick Scott and Mike Lee from this Senate Commerce Committee, and what I read about this, Rick Scott was saying that the way he found out was via a text message, I guess, from Mitch McConnell. He was upset that, in his words, McConnell didn't even confront him face-to-face about this. He just basically sent him a text saying, "You're off." I'll be honest here. There's been feuding between Senator McConnell and Senator Scott since last fall, ever since the election, shortly after last November's election, rather. They held this vote Republicans did in the Senate for their, for their leadership committees, right? And so they elected their minority leader. This is a behind closed doors vote, just the Republicans. Rick Scott ran against him, challenged Mitch McConnell. Now, Mitch McConnell has been in that position for a long time. And so he's definitely got, some street smarts about him and how to run it, et cetera. But out of nowhere, Rick Scott just challenges him and says that, wants a new direction for the party, blamed Mitch McConnell for their losses in the November midterm, on and on and on. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mike Lee is actually the one who nominated Rick Scott for, the possible minority position. When it was all said and done, McConnell, trumped him big time. I mean, he beat the tar out of this guy. McConnell won 37-10. And so, yes, there is definitely feuding. Also, Rick Scott's calling him out now, saying that Mitch McConnell in the past has caved into Democrats on the debt ceiling. I mean, it goes on and on with this stuff. But ultimately, Phil, I don't know if you noticed this, but Mitch McConnell didn't make a whole lot of drama out of this. He just took him off committees and just kind of moved on with life. Did you notice how this wasn't kind of a big deal to Senator McConnell? He just like, hey, you're done, and he's moving on.
Well, so I'll just say this: as much as I hate the guy, and as much as I think, for our listeners out there, it should be known that you never committee dump somebody over a text message, right? Just do it like a reasonable human being. Mitch McConnell is becoming stone cold at this, right? Like, Trump blasts him over some stuff, blasts his wife, and Mitch McConnell just comes out, doesn't say anything about it, doesn't even act like it happened. I mean, he's starting to get good at this kind of stuff, right?
He's got ice water flowing through his veins. I mean, while he's sitting there getting,
which is amazing because he looks like his face is melting. Yet cool as a cucumber.
Well, he's also 80 years old, so but I mean, you brought up the getting blasted. I mean, here he was, a month ago, getting just slammed by Trump left and right on Truth Social and whatever platform Trump could get on. And what does he do shortly after all that? He goes to a bipartisan group celebrating a bridge in, the Ohio-Kentucky bridge where he was out there with Joe Biden. And there he is on TV getting press time with Joe Biden. And yet again, Donald Trump just starts going ballistic over the guy. And as you said, it's almost like it doesn't even faze McConnell. He just sort of walks through the fire and just keeps on going.
Yeah, he literally gave Trump the old meh. When it came to that, it's like it's almost to the point where it's jaw dropping just to see how he reacts to it. But I do want to say, I mean, this is set. You talked about Rick Scott talking all kinds of shit after the fact. Keep in mind, Rick Scott's the guy who tanked the Senate's election fund, right? The Republican Senate election fund, lost millions of dollars out of that, to the point where McConnell had to put some of his own campaign money that he raised into various efforts to elect Republican senators. And he's going after him for, you're the reason why we lost the election. And that's just one strike against Rick Scott, right? Rick Scott was also the guy who came out and was like the first guy saying, we're going to cut Social Security and Medicare as part of our plan moving forward to, and rightly so. Mitch McConnell's just like, nah, bro, that's a losing position. Like, people are not happy with that. So we're not going to take that stance. And so I think it's a little absurd. I mean, Rick Scott is showing his ass in this case. Mike Lee, I'm confused about, like, why he's getting involved in this. It doesn't benefit him, but I don't know.
I kind of, Phil, I was going to say, I kind of wonder if Mike Lee maybe wasn't caught up in that moment. Like, oh, you know what? Let's rebel and we'll get Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley on our side and kind of rile up this side of the base. I kind of wonder if that maybe wasn't the angle Mike Lee took. But he's probably sitting there along with Rick Scott right now saying, maybe we shouldn't cross the party leader in the Senate. That maybe isn't such good optics, because like him, love him, or hate him, Mitch McConnell has been in the Senate since 1984. And as you alluded to, Phil, he knows a thing or two about how to play around there. And compared to him, Rick Scott and and Mike Lee are relative newcomers there. I mean, while they're not
and
rookies,
it should be noted that.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it should be noted that Mitch McConnell will literally ruin your life. I mean, look at the Attorney General. I mean, he's still the Attorney General, but I mean, come on now. Like, he could have had a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, I mean, so well, that's what I was saying. Mitch McConnell knows his way around the Senate and politics and et cetera. And so I don't think it was a wise move on these two. And Mitch McConnell, without making any drama, he just removes them and keeps going on with life. And next thing you know, he's doing his thing in the Senate, and they're kind of moving on. And Mitch McConnell also told Kevin McCarthy that you got the whole debt ceiling thing. We did the omnibus. Now you go step up to the plate and see what you can do with the debt ceiling. So he's just kind of sitting back, I guess you could say, living his best life in the Senate right now, doesn't he, Phil?
Yeah, well, an incredible segue into the debt ceiling, because the next topic is the McCarthy meeting with President Biden at the White House during the week. We previewed this last week as well, and turns out we got a ton of news from this meeting, right?
Yeah, a lot revealed. As you know what, we've got a little clip from that meeting, or from the post meeting of Speaker McCarthy. Let's go ahead and play that clip for our listeners.
Look, I don't want to put any words in his mouth. We had an hour conversation about this that I thought was a very good discussion, and we walked out saying we would continue the discussion. And I think there is an opportunity here to come to an agreement on both sides. And I think that's the best I think that's what the American people want. Look, they want us to be responsible and sensible about this. And that's exactly the way we've handled it. I told the president I would like to see if we can come to an agreement long before the deadline, and we can start working on other things.
Mr. Speaker, where should those budget cuts come from right now? Medicare and Social Security, the White House insists Republicans want to cut. What cuts do you want?
Well, let me be clear about that, and I've been clear many times. No, we're not talking about that. And to really be able to do this right, I'm not going to negotiate this in the press, right? I respect the conversation we had together, and we will continue that.
Mr. Speaker, you said today that you have a big plan. When are you going to share that big plan?
Look, I think the president and I have talked about a lot of different ideas, and we'll work to see if we can come to an agreement.
And that's what he had to say. So you can, since that's why I was being a little facetious when I mentioned all the news. What did we take away? Anything?
Here's what I took away. Well, again, he didn't reveal a lot, as Speaker McCarthy said. I'm not going to sit and debate this in front of the press. But here's what I did take away. I'll say this. As I am myself as an American, and I think Americans around the country should be happy to at least hear this outcome when they came out. I say McCarthy comes out of this meeting. He's not out there huffing and puffing. He's not getting mad. He's not trashing the president. He's not doing any of that. Steps out and says, I think we had a good meeting. I've heard something similar from Biden. I even heard a little snippet where President Biden said Kevin McCarthy is a decent man. And so I got the feeling that at the end of the day, they sat down and had a conversation. Now, what all they said in that hour, I don't know, because I wasn't in there. But the fact that they talked and that they're going to meet again, I think is a good sign. Again, we don't know a whole lot on this just yet, but I thought it was a good sign. I'm curious to see where this goes next and how they keep working it. But again, I look forward to these two sitting down again.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like a good sign if the sign is the detour is over, right? So if you're driving and you end up on a detour that takes you way off course, and then that detour is finally over, because the responsible thing is just for McCarthy to not try and negotiate this and just do it. They did it 3 times during the last administration. The administration before that, which was 8 years long, they did it twice. They tried to hold it up once. It didn't look good for them. This, to me, again, is people not learning their lessons from the past, right? And this, they keep talking about, well, we want to reduce spending and all this stuff, but this has nothing to do with this spending. This is just paying the bills that we've already incurred. So I just don't understand why this is dragging on. I get it. It's political. At the end of the day, we just got done talking about Mitch McConnell. he's going to wipe his hands of this. I mean, at the end of the day, he is going to, in the Senate, they're going to allow this to happen, and it's going to be stuck on McCarthy's table, and he's probably the one who's going to end up with all the optics out of this.
Well, let's go back to a minute on Mitch McConnell when you talked about him and how he's kind of enacting his revenge. Let's not forget, back in December, he was one of the leading senators working through and pushing through that omnibus that got signed right before the holiday break. And for our listeners, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans that worked with him on that got trashed by several Republicans in the House. Not all of them, but a number of them. Okay. One of them was Kevin McCarthy. And so in the back of his mind, Mitch McConnell, I think, is kind of sitting there saying, well, I did my part a few months ago. You didn't like what I had to do, so your turn. I think is kind of what he's saying. And I agree. I think the Senate is sitting there waiting, ready to go if it's time to jump in. You mentioned the negotiating part. There are some Democrats that have said that the president is wrong not to negotiate, one of them being Senator Joe Manchin. And there's been some others that I've seen have just talked about, hey, in a divided, split government like we have with the really close margins in the House and Senate, the fair thing to do is to sit down and at least have some conversations. I know the Problem Solvers Caucus is said that they are working hard on a solution to have one at the ready if they need to bring it out, kind of like what they did last year with the whole infrastructure bill. So I think there are people that are going to work on this thing. As you mentioned, the Senate may very well be the heroes in this one. But again, I think we're still early in this phase. And I think it was a good meeting. It was a good sign for the country to see these two sit down. And we'll watch going forward. I mean, that's all we can do. And this thing is going to just keep playing on and on and on until they get a solution.
Well, yeah, and then speaking of good signs for the country, we got some interesting jobs numbers. Experts were predicting somewhere in around 180,000 jobs added in the month of January. Turns out we got 517,000 jobs. Unemployment is at its lowest rate since May of 1969. Cam, what do you make of that?
Well, so, I mean, you just kind of read the figures there. What I saw from this when I kind of dug into this a little bit was the biggest winners or the biggest boosts here were in the leisure and hospitality jobs coming. And again, what I read, some experts suggest some of these are, job numbers that came back are still jobs that were, or are rebuilding from COVID, I should say. But
in all fairness, though, let me get you ask you this one question. If that were the case, wouldn't we be seeing the lowest unemployment since 2019?
Well,
not 1969.
I don't know the optics either, though, as far as who's retired, what constitutes, exactly who's seeking jobs. I mean, I don't know all the behind the scene optics there. I'm just kind of going off what I read. I also heard something from Larry Summers today, a pretty well-known economist, who said he's not so certain this is, this amazing sign. He thinks there's actually people out there that are overhiring because they've had a chance to hire again, kind of coming out of COVID. And he hasn't 100% made up his mind yet on, just where these job numbers lie. But I will tell you, on the surface, regardless, and we could sit here and debate all night about this, that, or the other, but I will just say on the surface, this, I'm sure, is something that the president sees as good numbers and something that I'm sure he's going to want to get his message out on. Does it make a boost for him or not? That remains to be seen, because that's what he's fighting is his underwater poles. So that's the biggest thing he's got to be able to take from this is something like job numbers, or as you've kind of mentioned, a couple of the bills, that he's had in the past, whatever. He's got to be able to package that and get it out to the American public. I heard an ABC News poll today that said that 62% of the country feels the president of the United States, the current one, has done little to nothing since he's been in the White House. Now, I know people can push back and talk about a lot of things he's done, but at the end of the day, though, that's still a poll that's been taken and shows us that there's still a lot of people in this country that are dissatisfied with him, and that's what he's got to be able to fight back on. Is that with these job numbers or whatever it is? That's the kind of hurdles that he's facing.
Yeah, I mean that poll definitely is disturbing. I think even you would agree that 62% of Americans might be a little off kilter when they're, staring at a president who's legislatively the most successful since in a long time, basically in over 70 years, or sorry, probably over 60 years. But with that being said, I want to further your talk about economists being skeptical, because there are some other news, and as the economics nerd on the podcast between you and I, there's some signs that this is really positive, right? Especially the fact that what we actually got was more than twice the predicted results. While some economists are saying, yeah, it is hospitality, things like that. There's also proof that the 70 plus infrastructure projects around the country that kicked into gear on January 1st are actually starting to pick up some hiring. Manufacturing was one of the areas that was also up by quite a large margin, which is a good sign, and some say might have even been affected even this early by the Chips and Science Act. But one of the things that I have been hearing is that real wage growth is not up in the same manner you'd expect if this was all organic job creation, right? And so based on this number, right, I won't get too deep into this because this is a pretty complicated principle, but you look at the kind of the basics of supply and demand. When there's demand for workers, one of the things that goes along with increased hiring is also real wage growth, right? And real wage growth was up by, I think, I should have written it down, Cam. It was either 3.4 or 4.3. My number dyslexia is getting me, but that is not as high as a lot of economists would like it to see with these low numbers. So, yeah. It's not 100% sunny, but it's like sunny with a flurry of clouds.
Again, I'm not going to dispute that these aren't good numbers, but again, when the president sits there and there was a poll run where it said that 62% of the country feels this man has accomplished very little or nothing, and I think it was very little. I forget what their optics were, but it was something to the effect of very little or nothing. That's over 60% of the nation feels that. That's not good. And I agree. You and your administration at that point you've got to do things to try and right that ship. There's also a poll, and I don't have the numbers down, but there was a poll that came out this past week that said a overwhelming majority of Americans, and it was a high number. Again, I don't have what an overwhelming majority was, but let's go with high numbers. A high number of people in the United States do not want to see either Joe Biden or Donald Trump on the next White House ticket. So he's that was that AP poll I saw too. Yeah, I mean he's got an uphill battle. But what I'm going to say is tomorrow night we've got the State of the Union address, and this is the kind of stuff that if I was the president of the United States, I would be out there talking about these job numbers. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's going to tomorrow night. So I mean, we'll see kind of how that goes. But, Phil, what do you expect to hear out of this tomorrow night, out of this State of the Union address, besides job numbers, I should say?
I expect him to do exactly the opposite of what the past administration did, right? So he's going to stay. I would expect Joe Biden at least, and like I said, I could be wrong about this. We'll see. He could stay 100% positive the whole time and not say anything disparaging to Republicans. I think if anything, you're going to hear a little bit of they're holding the economy hostage with the debt ceiling or Social Security and Medicare. That's the only thing I think he's going to mention. I think he's going to stay positive. He's going to focus on the accomplishments of the last 2 years. specifically the last year, and it is going to be capped off with things like the low unemployment rate, the jobs numbers, the stock market seems to like kind of be recovering. I know for me and actually most economists say that the stock market has no relevance to the economy, but for some reason people like to use that as an example. I think that's what he's going to do. He's just going to tout, those accomplishments and talk about what the things that they can do in the next 2 years, which granted probably isn't very much, but he's going to attempt it.
So I'll disagree a little bit. I think he's going to attack Republicans a little bit more. I heard kind of a preview of what he had to the Democratic National Committee. I think it was a Democratic National Committee late last week. He was going over some things. And so I think he's actually going to take a bit more of a negative tone on this, more than I would like to see. But we'll see. Again, this is going to happen tomorrow night. So I don't see much need for us to sit and kind of make predictions when 24 hours from now he will literally be giving that speech. So with that being said, and also it should be mentioned too before we segue on this one, the Republican rebuttal will be given by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders tomorrow night. So again, for our listeners, tune into that, the State of the Union, and then the rebuttal afterwards. But speaking of
the irony of that is like so hilarious. Like,
well, I mean, there's always a rebuttal. There's always a rebuttal.
No, I know, but they picked her. Why? Because she did such a great job as the press secretary.
I mean, she's making news in Arkansas. So again, I'm not the one picking these. So we'll again, she's a fresh face, a new governor. She's been in the news lately. I think the Republicans see an avenue to put her out there. But speaking of women in politics, I want to kind of wrap up tonight by saying we do have another presidential name in the ring for the Republicans, at least seeking out, their endorsement or seeking out the Republican nod for the White House in 2024. And that was Nikki Haley this past week announced she is going to run. Now, she is only polling at about 2 to 3%.
But who believes in polls? I mean, come on now.
Well, so with that being said, though, Phil, by her announcing, now let's, again, take the poll numbers for what they are. They're kind of low. Will her announcing give her any kind of boost here at all? Because I'm going to say this before you answer that even. Donald Trump doesn't seem the least bit concerned about her in the ring.
No, he seems almost happy about it. He's out there talking all kinds of shit about DeSantis, poking other people in the face. When she gets in, he knows it benefits him. And that's why he said, well, if that's what she wants to do, she can just do it, or something along those lines, right? So I think this actually improves his position. I mean, is that the direction you guys want to go? Whatever. I mean,
well, so I do think he sees this as benefiting him because, as I've mentioned before, or you've mentioned before, the more people that are in this primary, the better it is for him. Because while those other 5 or 6 people, be it Nikki Haley, I mean, we keep hearing Pence, Mike Pompeo. Today I heard Tim Scott might be looking at throwing his name in the ring. Whatever, right? 5, 6 other people, as they're out there knocking each other out and beating on each other. Donald Trump's got that solid 25, 30% or whatever, base of the country that's his base that's going to stick with him no matter what. And, that's easier for him to rise up to the top like he did in 2016. Here's what I think Nikki Haley's doing by throwing her name in the ring, honestly. I think she's angling for a possible vice president spot. That's what I think she's doing. I think at the end of the day, she realizes that she's down in the polls, but I think she sees herself as getting in there, making a little bit of news, gaining some momentum, if you will, and becoming attractive to the final nominee, whether that's Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. I think she sees herself as a possible VP spot person, I should say, and I think that's why she's doing this.
Yeah, a possibility. But without lingering too much on that, we've got to wrap it up. We're coming to the end, but before, do you want to share the exciting news to our listeners?
Yeah, so first of all, just to our listeners, again, get on our social media, like us, follow us, Facebook, Instagram, all of that. get on our website, pocketpolitics.co, and find us on there. And there's links to all of our social media and our podcast on there. Continue to listen to us. We certainly do appreciate it. The exciting news I want to share, though, is we have been for some time now wanting to get some interviews going on our podcast, and it looks like we're going to kick that off shortly. So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we are looking at getting an interview here with a gentleman named Mr. Antoine Bohannon. He is a military vet, and he's got his name in the hat, and he's currently running for the Tennessee 9th U.S. congressional seat. So we very much look forward to talking to Mr. Bohannon. He's a up and comer in the Republican Party, if you will. At least they're in Tennessee politics, and so we look forward to sitting down with him and having a conversation. And like I said, the next 2 to 3 weeks, that's going to happen. And we're working on setting up some other interviews going forward. So again, join us here in the coming weeks for our sit down with Mr. Bohannon and others that we have to follow. So it's been a great show tonight, though, and I think it's time to wrap it up with our parting shots. Bill, do you want to go first tonight with your parting shot?
Yeah, it's a little bit of sad news for me, at least. For those of our listeners who know me personally, I am a big soccer fan, specifically the Premier League. Big Liverpool guy. Liverpool is I think I jinxed them by talking about a big win they had at the beginning of the season. This was last year. I mentioned it in a parting shot, and they have gone off the rails. They are currently 10th in the Premier League, which is the top, basically, soccer league in the world. I don't know what's going on. They're in the past couple of years, they've won the championship of that league. They've won various other trophies, and they are clearly having a rough season. But maybe we got a couple more months. Maybe we'll end in a positive news. But the worst thing to come out of the Premier League is the longest serving American coach in the league. His name is Jesse Marsh from Racine, Wisconsin. Got fired today. So I woke up to the news. I was pretty bummed out, even though I'm not a fan of the team that he coaches. They were not doing so well either. And he got fired. But I'm always a fan of kind of bringing Americans into the top league in the world and kind of showing that we can, be dominant in the world of soccer as we are in a lot of other sports. It's just sad to see he got fired. It should be noted that there are 3 American players on that team. So while the coach got fired, they cannot get rid of those 3 Americans. So there will still be some odd accents in the Premier League, from the Texan, the New Jersey natives that are still on the team. Over to you, Cam.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll stick in the sports world for mine. I will just say this past week, Tom Brady announced his retirement. Now, this isn't the first time we've heard this from Mr. Brady. This time, though, I think this one actually sticks. I will just say this. I mean, Tom Brady, enters the NFL in the year 2000. Here we are, 2023, and this man was still playing. It has been decades this guy has been on the field, literally. I feel like entire, generations around the country have grown up watching this man play football. And whether you liked him or not, I think we can all kind of sit back and feel a tinge of sadness, if you will, to see someone who's been involved in that game and had as much success as he has had step down. And again, I know he said it last year, but decided to come back. I think this year it sticks. I think Mr. Brady is done and he's off to new things. So, again, a little bit of sadness seeing that happen because he has just been around the game so long. But that is, with that being said, I think that wraps us up for this week. Another great show here. Phil, thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, not to cut into your partying shot at all, but do you remember where the news of him backing out of his retirement last year leaked?
I don't even remember now.
It was at a Premier League soccer game that he attended as a fan.
Awesome.
Yeah, and he got caught on camera, on the TV cameras, whispering it to Ronaldo. So just a kind of interesting conversion of our two parting shots.
Great. So we tied those together. There you go. So okay, fantastic.
Hey, football is football. So
there you go. So we've talked about a lot this week, from everything from George Santos to soccer to Tom Brady and everything in between. Thank you so much, Phil. Do you got anything else before we sign off?
No, everybody have a good night.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and until next time.
Bye.